So first, what is humanism? Well, in a nutshell, a belief that human needs and values are more important than religious beliefs or the needs and desires of humans. An example could be someone who creates their own set of standards of conduct and moral judgment. Now, how did it impact the way people looked at the government? Well, people became more open-minded and had curious minds.
How did humanists value education? How is it different than before? Reading and writing became useful in daily life. They believed it was important to train young people's minds, body, and character. Before the Renaissance, teachers built up more religion rather than a curious mind.
How did humanism challenge or change and respect the religious worldview?
Classical texts, such as Bibles, were admired and studied by scholars. Religion continued to play an important role in their lives, just as it had in the Middle Ages.
What is humanism? Humanism is a term in which inner beauty of an individual was very important and should be cherished. Humanism is also known as psychology and has been a thing since Roman and ancient Greek times. The major reason humanism was able to flourish is the decline of the church because the people wanted answers. There were two main answers that the people really wanted: why the Black Death was happening and why they shouldn't think for themselves. This is what humanism is and why it developed.
In the eyes of the humanist people, they started to think of life more independently instead of believing in churches and money. Greek humanity started to realize that life is worth living instead of simply endured. Renaissance thinkers and artists started to believe more in the dignity and potential of themselves. The most important characteristics of the individual is they have a curious mind for questioning. People can achieve great things through learning. Individuals should be skilled in lots of areas. They should develop their minds, bodies, and spirits.
The main question about this topic is what did humanists believe, and why did humanism spread? To answer this question, you can break it up into smaller and more specific questions. The first question is, what did humanists believe? Humanists believe that humans should have an open and questioning mind, and the will to be educated and skilled. People can be self-reliant and use the power of reason, which means find the truth for themselves. Everyone can achieve great things from learning. Humans should develop their minds, bodies, and spirits.
The second question you want to ask yourself is, how is humanism different from a feudal mindset? First of all, having a feudal mindset means placing people in categories and not being able to move or change your amount of power and importance. It's believing one person or group is more superior than others. Humanism is different because it is almost the exact opposite. It's believing everyone is equal and it has the potential to become great. The last thing to answer this main question is, what led to the spread of humanism? The Greek and Roman manuscripts had been preserved in libraries in the Muslim world and in monasteries and church libraries throughout Europe. Petrarch and other humanists collected the manuscripts and made copies and translations of them. In only 1 year, humanist Giovanni brought 240 Greek manuscripts to Europe. Humanists wanted these ancient works available to the widest possible readership. In order to truly be cultured, a person should read good books and look at the great works of art, and overall look at the brilliant things that are inspirational. Curiosity was a big part of the spread of humanism. Life on earth was cherished rather than suffered through. This is what humanists believe and how humanism spread.
Humanism. What is it? Humanism happened during the Renaissance era. It's when the beauty of an individual is seen as superior, like how people think cats are beautiful and graceful. With humanism came philosophies. A philosophy is the study of knowledge, reality, and existence. This was important in an area of knowledge like a classroom. Humanism is the belief that all mankind has beauty, worth, and dignity. This shows that life should not be taken for granted and should be cherished. How did humanism spread? the church declined any idea of humanism. This decline was the main reason for humanism spreading. Pretty soon, people began thinking less about God, the afterlife, and the saints, and became more interested in thinking about themselves, their natural world, and the here and now. What was left of the Black Death and the Church's sad attempts to explain or stop the suffering led many people to look for better answers outside the church walls. The rise of the market economy, which replaced the feudalism system and freed the individual from serfdom, allowed them to make money, grow, and think on their own. Soon, money began to be gained through trade, and the power of the church declined even more. The result was that the city-states and the monarchies were both governed more by economy rather than religious restriction. All in all, the church became replaced with the secular human's capacity to learn, create, and enjoy. The power of the church was replaced with the idea of humanism, where the study of human progress and human nature is at the center of all things. You failed. Oh. Hi. No.
The humanist approach. Humanists believe that people could use the power of reason to find truth for themselves. They believed one should be skilled in many different areas. Humanism was able to spread because of individual independence and interests. Variety was embraced rather than shunned, and people became more interested in celebrating life.
Hello everybody, welcome to the early show with Kimmy Wallen. Today we're going to be having a very special guest, fellow humanist Leonardo da Vinci. Yay! We will be asking him a few questions right after this break.
Now with humanism, we support beauty and self-worth. Easy breezy, beautiful cover spins.
Ooh, hot! And we're back with Leonardo da Vinci. We're going to be asking him a few questions. So, Leonardo da Vinci, what did humanists believe?
Humanists believe that of self-worth and beauty. So you could have like beauty now, and you could be like, whoa, that person's really hot. And then you could have like self-worth, would be like, whoa, I'm important now.
Oh, yeah, thank you for telling us that. And my next question is, how was this different than a feudal mindset?
Well, in a feudal mindset, you had to be like this, and this, and you couldn't move, and nobody thought you're beautiful. You just kind of were like, had self-worth. You kind of just thought something, and if it was just like that, you're just self-worth and beauty. That's just what you didn't have that. Well, now with humanism, you have self-worth and beauty.
Okay. And we're going to be asking him the all-important question right after these messages.
Use Spence's peanut butter. Spreads just like humanism.
And we're back. Yay! With the all-important final question. So, Mr. Leonardo da Vinci, what factors led to the spread of humanism?
Okay, so now with humanists, they were like also called scholars back then, right? So what would happen is they started telling people about it. It was like, whoa, you can have self-worth and beauty now. It's like, whoa, that's cool. So then people started telling other people, and it was like, whoa, I can tell people about this and this and this and this, and just work. So now, and then people started talking about it, and then it was like, well, now I have self-worth and beauty.
That is true. Thank you, Leonardo da Vinci, for teaching us a bit about humanism. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I love you all. This is
So
the
do I.
Early Show with Kimmy Wallen.
And this guy!
Yeah.
DiCaprio.
No, it's Da Vinci.
DiCaprio.
You want to fight?
Yes.
All right, you're live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, I'm DeQuavis, and here's Yogi in the streets talking about humanism. Hi, can I ask you a few questions for my worldview video?
Sure, what's it about?
It's about how humanism impacted the individual and why it spread.
I like chicken nuggets. What's humanism?
Humanism is a rationalist outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters.
I like your hat. I'm gonna wear your hat now.
Do you know what humanists believe? Humanists can use the power of reason, that is thinking of, to find the truth for themselves. Do you know how this was different than a feudal mindset?
Is that where a mama duck crosses the street with the babies?
Hey Yogi, I don't think our contestant is really understanding the concept. Maybe try explaining a little, or giving a few hints.
Greek and Roman manuscripts have been preserved in libraries in the Muslim world and monasteries throughout cathedral libraries throughout Europe. Bertrand and other humanists collected these manuscripts and made copies and translations of them. In 1 year alone, humanist Kenobi Esserva brought 240 Greek manuscripts to Europe.
Now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Buble Souffle, and in my hand I have shush cream. It's good for elbows, it's good for your knees, it's good for everything in between.
Humanism by Laura and Eva. Humanism impacted many aspects of society like religion and education. Civic humanists, meaning people who were interested in being good members of society, believed that being a responsible citizen meant educating yourself about history and political issues and working to improve society.
Many teachers were humanists who believed it was important to train young people in their characters, bodies, and minds. They also encouraged a questioning attitude in their students.
Religion played an important role in the lives of these people. Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas like individual achievement and the importance of history and the arts.
Humanism impacted the way people viewed government because many humanists had positions in the government, so they were able to affect many aspects of society.
Humanists valued education because some humanists were teachers and taught their perspectives and opinions to their students. This is different because children didn't have the opportunity to be educated. Also, they were allowed to question things, whereas they couldn't before.
Humanism challenged and changed the religious worldview because of the decline of the church. Humanism became more valued by people because of its unique perspective and worldview. It also respected the church's point of view.
The end.
How did humanism impact the way people viewed the government? Some humanists had important roles in the government, such as scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officials, writers, scientists, architects, artists, and musicians. As a result, they were able to affect many aspects of Renaissance society. Renaissance humanists were interested in what classical authors had written about good government. How did humanists value education? How was this different from before? Many humanists were dedicated teachers, valuing education a lot. They believed that it was important to train young people's minds, characters, and bodies. This approach to education is sometimes
called Educating the Whole Child. They also encouraged a curious, questioning attitude. Many rulers and wealthy people hired humanists as tutors for their children.
How did humanism challenge/change and respect the religion of worldviews?
Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values, such as individual achievement and the importance of history and the arts. Religion continued to play an important part in their lives, just as it had in the Middle Ages.
How does humanism impact society, religion, and education? How did humanism impact the way people view the government? In the government, there is humanist scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officials, writers, scientists, architects, artists, and musicians. Some of these humanists have important positions in the church and royal court. As a result, many humanist aspects were able to affect the Renaissance society. How did humanism challenge/change the respect of the religious worldview? The classical texts that were admired and studied by Renaissance scholars were written before the beginning of Christianity. Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values such as individual achievement and the importance of history and arts. Religion continued to play an important part of their lives, just as it had during the Middle Ages. Petrarch, for example, was a devout Christian who edited a new Greek version of the New Testament. How did humanism value education? Many humanists were dedicated teachers who ran their own schools. They believed that it was important to train young people's character and body as well as their minds. This approach to education is sometimes called educating the whole child. They also encouraged a curious, questioning attitude in their students. Many rulers and wealthy people hired as tutors for their children.
Humanists were interested in what classical authors had written about good government. Cicero's idea that public service was the duty of everyone in society was very influential. Humanists believed that being a responsible citizen meant educating yourself about history and political issues and working to improve society. Society. There were humanist scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officials, writers, scientists, architects, artists, and musicians. Some had very important roles in government, the church, and at royal courts. As a result, they were able to affect many aspects of society.
The classical texts that were admired and studied by Renaissance scholars were written before the beginning of Christianity. Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values such as individual achievements and the importance of history and the arts. Religion continued to play an important part in their lives, just as it had during the Middle Ages. Petrarch, for an example, was a devout Christian who edited a new Greek version of the New Testament.
Many humanists were dedicated teachers who ran their own schools. They believed that it was important to train young people's characters and bodies as well as their minds. The approach to education is sometimes called educating the whole child. They also encouraged a curious, questioning attitude in their students. Many rulers and wealthy people hired humanists as tutors for their children.
How did humanism impact society, religion, and education? Let's break it down. Humanism impacted society in the way people viewed government. There were humanist teachers, public officials, writers, scientists, artists, and musicians. Some had important roles in government, at church, and at royal courts. Renaissance humans were interested in authors that wrote about good government. They believed that they were responsible to educate themselves about history, public issues, and working to improve society. They believed it was important to train young people's characters and bodies as well as their minds. Some also hired tutors for children because they valued education. Classical texts were studied and admired by Renaissance scholars, were written at the beginning of Christianity. Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values such as individual achievement and the importance of history and the arts.
Humanism focuses on human beings, their values, abilities, and individual worth. Humanism led to new attitudes towards art, philosophy, and the way government was viewed. Humanists did not only have one job. There were scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officials, scientists, architects, artists, and musicians. Many humanists had important positions in government, church, and royal courts. These people were able to influence and change many aspects of society.
Philosophers studied reality and existence. One philosopher named Cicero had an idea that public service was the duty of everyone in society. Civic humanists believed being a responsible citizen meant educating yourself and working to improve society. Humanist teachers believed it was important to train young people's bodies as well as their characters and minds. They also encouraged a questioning attitude and hired humanist tutors for their students. Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values such as individual achievement and the importance of history and the arts. Religion continued to be important, but the people began to lose hope and faith.
There were humanists, scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officers, writers, scientists, artists, and musicians, some of them in important positions. Renaissance humanists were interested in what classic others had written about good environment, to the idea that public services. Many humanists were decorated teachers who ran their own schools. The classic texts that were read and studied by Renaissance schools were written before the origin of Christmas. Renaissance thinks embraced ideas and values such as individual achievement and the importance of history and the arts.
Hi, welcome to the Bray and Clay Report. Today, the top story is humanism and how it affected society, religion, and education. Here today on the panel, we have Georgie, Clayton O'Neill, and Braden Gerstenbuehler, who is unfortunately not able to attend with us today. And I'm your host, Parker Betts. Let's start off with our first question. What is humanism? Braden, can you give Natesh, sorry, the script was made for Grace. Natesh, can you give us an answer?
Yes, I can. Humanism is the concept that human lives are beautiful and that human life is superior and important.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to our next question. Were people like scientists and teachers in support of humanism?
Yes, and many people were in support of humanism and many were not in support of humanism.
Very good. We will have a total of 5 questions on this panel. Excuse me. Now, on to question 3. Teachers in humanist society believed in a teaching study called educating the whole child. Is this true?
Yes, it is true. It was a concept introduced when humanism went all the way into the education system.
Thank you. Now for our second last question. Humanists believed in passing ideas and knowledge. Is this true?
Yes, it is true. Humanists believed in accepting and acknowledging other ideas.
Thank you, Nitesh. One more question. Humanists were interested in what classical authors had written about. Do you know what they were interested in?
They were interested in good government or fair elected government, otherwise known as democracy.
Thank you. That will be all today on the panel report. Thanks for watching.
This is Brock and Brandon, and we did the Society, Religion, and Education for our Humanist project. There are humanist scholars, philosophers, teachers, public officials, writers, and scientists. Some of them had different offices and positions in government, the church, and the royal courts. As a result, they're able to affect many aspects of the Renaissance society.
Humanists believed that being a responsible citizen was to educate yourself into better society.
Many humanists were dedicated teachers who ran their own schools. They believed that it was important to train a young person's characters and bodies as well as their minds. This approach to education is sometimes called educating the whole child. They also encouraged a curious, questioning attitude into their students.
Renaissance thinkers emphasized ideas and values.
And history was very important. Just as it had during the Middle Ages, Petrarch, for example, was a devout Christian who edited a new Greek version of the New Testament. The end.
Boom.
Humanism is the foundation of the Renaissance art. During this time, showing the beauty of the human body and the natural world was the thing to do. People started paying artists to make pieces for them. The people who paid artists for artwork were wealthy members of the merchant class, the government, and the church. These pieces were decorating private homes or on display at a public place. Originally, paintings in the Renaissance were religious, but as time went on, people started painting portraits and landscapes. These paintings showed how each individual painter had humanist ideas. They also represented the world, beauty, and human excellence. Renaissance painters got their inspiration from the Greeks and Romans. They also got inspiration from the world around them, so there's an aspect of naturalism in their art. Naturalism is emphasizing the natural world using perspective and shadows, texture patterns, realistic details, and elegance. The quote from the earlier picture is all about architects. It explains what architects need to know. Some of the things it says is draftsman, geometry, history, and physics. Just by hearing some of these things, you can tell how much work and thought went into designing a building. But before a book called De Architectura was discovered, architects didn't use classical features in their works. They were just laborers. After this book, architects raised their status to artists. Speaking of raising status, sculptors also went from craftsmen to artists. They would be part of construction teams of cathedrals. They would make figures and decoration that told stories. Like an architect, during the Renaissance, sculptors like Michelangelo raised the status and became celebrities. Humanism affected authors to focus on their own thoughts and emotions and express them in writing. For example, a humanist writer named Christine de Pizan wrote about her belief that men and women should be judged on their abilities and virtues, not their gender. This was really groundbreaking back then because it is still an issue today. Like Christine de Pizan, J.K. Rowling decided to write her initials so people wouldn't judge her based on the fact that she was a girl.
During the 14th century and the Renaissance, humanists became very interested in artwork. The artwork was originally based off of religion, but throughout the Renaissance, changed towards nature, beauty, and, of course, the human body. These portraits would be then sold to merchants, who would make money off of them and sell them to churches and government. Marcus Vitruvius Polio was an architect and writer who influenced and raised the status of the profession of labor artists. In the early Renaissance, writers focused on the text of Greek and Roman and would make books, language, and spoke their accessibility. During the Renaissance, a female writer received education and then wrote a book and that she argued with men that women should not be judged, and off this basis showed her abilities.
How did humanists impact how art was created? How was art portrayed by humanist thinkers? They portrayed art by drawing the beauty of the human body and the natural world around them. Where did humanist artists get their inspiration? They got inspiration from everything around them. What factors led to the spread of humanism? People began to lose faith in God and decline the church. How did humanism impact architecture and literature? Architects had to be well-rounded and know how to write, draw, and know math as well as history. How did humanism impact how art was created? In conclusion, it made the arts more important, diverse, and unique.